Okay, we're live. Welcome everyone to Ask an Archaeologist 2025 on Inside Archaeology. Woohoo! Very exciting. So, if you guys are... Oh, and here's Flint just on time. Here we go. Hey Flint, welcome.
Hey.
Yes, I think we have quite a few people over from your stream, so thanks very much for plugging. I appreciate it. Yeah, welcome everybody to Inside Archaeology. If you've not been here before, I'm one of the many YouTube channels in our little group here that is trying to promote real archaeology across social media.
Rachel.
Yeah?
Could you mute your audio?
My audio. Is that better?
That's my fault. That's my fault. Sorry. I was playing your stream.
Oh, okay. To be fair, when I did what was it? Earlier this week on Monday, when I did a live stream reacting to Zahi Hawass on Piers Morgan, I was like muting myself in between watching the stream and reacting because I was like drinking water, and I went on a whole rant for about like 5 minutes about something, and I had muted myself the entire time, and the live chat was just like, "What are you doing? Unmute!"
Sorry about that.
Just laughing at myself. Anyways, hopefully no repeats of that tonight. So yeah, welcome everyone. It's Ask an Archaeologist day here in the UK. So this is your day to ask all of your burning questions that you always wanted to know about archaeology. It can be about artifacts, it can be about sites, it can be about the career, how do you get involved, etc. And we have a great lineup of guests here today. I'll start off by introducing myself, and then I'll hand the floor over to everybody else. So my name's Rachel. I run Inside Archaeology. I am an archaeologist. I'm Canadian, but I'm based in the UK. I have an undergraduate degree in Near Eastern and Classical Archaeology and a master's in human osteoarchaeology. And I have dug in the Kingdom of Jordan, and then I've also worked as a professional archaeologist in both Canada and on a couple of sites across the UK. So I'm not an academic. I'm very much a quote-unquote commercial archaeologist, as it's sometimes called. So I can answer all your burning questions about how to get involved in that. And I think next up we'll go with the first person who joined the chat tonight, which is JT. So you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm JT Lewis. I'm also currently working in commercial archaeology in the US. I specialize in the Eastern Woodlands, so mostly mound building communities. In August, I will actually be an assistant professor of anthropology at Arkansas Tech University. So I'm kind of transitioning from commercial to
Congratulations.
Academic archaeology. So yeah, and this is my first Ask an Archaeology Day, so I'm pretty excited for it.
Well, we're excited to have you. John, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I have a BA in archaeology from Yale and a PhD in anthropology from Harvard. My experience in commercial archaeology was doing historical stuff back in Maryland and Virginia in the early 80s. I also did lots of well pad and pipeline surveys in eastern New Mexico, a landscape that is now blighted by oil derricks and just, fossil fuel exploitation. I'm sorry for having contributed to some of that, but at least we saved some archaeology along the way. I'm mostly a specialist in Central and South America, and people sometimes identify me as a Mesoamericanist, but I'm not really. I focus on what's called the Istmo-Colombian area, which is southern Central America and northern South America. And although I teach courses on the ancient Maya and Mesoamerica and the Andes, I've really been trying to promote a model for what I refer to as the American Mediterranean, which is looking at the Caribbean and also the adjacent Gulf of Mexico with eyes similar to those of how archaeologists look at the Mediterranean, looking at the interaction of all of the islands and mainlands and other things around it. I mean, Mediterranean archaeology is extremely mature and has been doing this for a couple hundred years, but we're really just getting started in the Americas. And needless to say, archaeologists tend to view their own areas as the center of the universe. I really think that the Caribbean and the lands around it were very much the center of the Americas.
Great. And then Flint, last but not least.
Yeah, so my name is Flint, and since a lot of people rated this stream from my stream, I think they sort of know who I am, but that's okay. So I'm an archaeologist, and I grew up doing archaeology because my dad was a Stone Age archaeologist, and he named me Flint after this stone right here, and he named my brother Chip because it's Chipstone, And so I had no choice but to become an archaeologist. But to escape his shadow, I got into classics, and I do classical archaeology because he did Paleolithic stuff, that kind of old crap. And so I focus on animal bones from the Greek world, looking at kind of diet and economy and animal husbandry and agriculture and how this all relates to urbanism and environmental change in the Greek world. And you probably all know me because I absolutely destroyed Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan. And so my big goal in terms of public archaeology is not so much to destroy Graham Hancock. That's like a side gig. But what I really want to do is I want to build out this larger archaeology ecosystem online to really connect us all, which is why I came here right now. It's why I have a lot of people on my channel. And I want to make sure that us archaeologists have a larger platform. And so I think that these kind of live streams and these connections right here are one of the best ways to do that to the community.
Excellent. Well, I hope that we've already got 2 questions from the chat already. So the first one is a bit of a funny one, but still, I think, relevant to the chat, which is, how do you keep the sand and dirt from your underpants when you're on a dig, or are we just built different? Which is hilarious, because I remember reading somewhere once that, like, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something about how the average human adult ingests 2 garbage bags worth of dirt over their lifetime, and an archaeologist, it's like 20 bags, which is definitely
I would say 2 bags
true.
of dirt every summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it depends on how much you keep your hands out of your pants while you're digging.
I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the kind of dirt that's there. So, like, when I was in Egypt digging there, because it was sand was just friggin' everywhere. It was in the food, it was in your underwear, it was in the shower, it was in your socks, it was in your bed, it was in your pillow, it was in your hair. You could not avoid sand. On other projects, it's different because it's a different consistency. It's like silty soil, loam type stuff. And so you get muddy and stuff like that, but you can get clean afterwards and not have to deal with it during your free time. But in Egypt, I remember just sand everywhere all the time. There's no avoiding it.
Yeah. There's this is maybe going to date me, but Aladdin 3, I think, it's the third Aladdin movie. There's a bit where Genie says, it's like an ad, and he's like, sand, it's everywhere, get used to it. And that's how I always think about it.
Yeah.
And
that's what it's like.
Yeah, very true for me in Jordan. When I was digging in Jordan, it was quite funny because I'm not somebody that's ever really had much of a tan. I don't do tanning, as you can see from my skin tone. I go red as a lobster. But in Jordan, everybody would be obsessed with trying to get their tan during the season. And we'd all be like, showing off our farmer tan, and we'd be great. And then we go to the Dead Sea for a weekend, and you slather the mud from the Dead Sea all over yourself because it's supposed to be really good for your skin. And then when you wash it off, your tan was just dirt. It was ingrained in your skin. JT, you have something to add?
Yeah, I luckily don't work where there's a lot of sand. Everything's kind of silty loam, and so it's nice. We're mostly what we're more worried about is red bugs and ticks. That's the killer thing out here. You can come home and just have 10 ticks and hundreds of bites all over you from the red bugs in it. So that's always my biggest fear going in.
I hate bugs, so I
Well,
get
it's
you.
an interesting phenomenon in Central America. In Costa Rica, the clay is really clay and sticks to everything. But something I was always amazed by, and I think this may be a universal, Flint and JT can weigh in on this. But those of us who were from the States would wind up being very dirty by the end of the day. But our local workmen somehow were able to work all day long and were as clean when they finished as they were when they started. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were mindful of the fact that they didn't have washing machines at home and that their mothers or their wives would have to wash their clothes. But there was just a way that they could move that they didn't get dirty. It was kind of astounding. And they used to joke at us because we'd look at each other at the end of the day and they'd be like, "What's up, man? You gringos get all dirty."
That's great. We have a second question, which is, my teenage daughter has looked at doing a degree in archaeology. She went to open days at St. Andrews and Glasgow University. Any advice? So those are 2 universities in the UK. St. Andrews. Actually, I have a friend who did the program at St. Andrews. She went all the way through to a PhD. My biggest advice for doing university archaeology is to just like take the plunge and do it and just enjoy yourself. If while you're there, take the any opportunity you have to go do field school, maybe do some lab work for a professor, volunteering, etc. But I personally, I think maybe this is the same for everybody else, but I loved university, particularly my undergrad. And I really, when I started studying archaeology, I felt like, I like, not to say that I was an outsider or I was really bullied at like high school or whatever, but I got to university and I was just like, I have found my people. All of these people like the same thing that I like, and we can talk about it all day, and it's so exciting, it's so fun. And I actually was telling my husband, or I was saying to my husband the other day, no offense, because I love him, but if I had to pick any part of my life to like, you know, Groundhog Day, it would be during my my undergraduate university, which is before I met him. So, yeah. Anybody else have anything to add?
Well, I just got back early this morning, about 3 a.m., from a wonderful trip to the Adriatic and also to Greece. And our host while we were there was someone who was one of my best friends my freshman year in college in 1976. So another nice thing about these college experiences is that people will stay with you for the rest of your life. And they wind up doing really interesting things. And among the things I'm enjoying now is sort of visiting with these friends from college and reliving some of those years. But that's another joyful thing about that time. It's just wonderful.
I mean, I would say if you're trying to think about choosing between Glasgow and St. Andrews, is that they're both good universities, but I would talk to current students more than the professors. The professors are trying to sell it to you. See what the vibe is from the students. Are they enjoying their degree program? Do they like the vibe there? Which vibe do you seem to vibe more with? So follow your gut and definitely talk to students and not just professors to get a sense of if you are making that kind of choice, right? Because I think that that's important that you think through what students are saying and not just what the professors are trying to sell to you to get you to come. Not to say if you came to Cardiff Open Days, I'd be trying to sell you really hard as well, but you should trust the other students more than me, even though you should trust me too.
No, I think that's a good point too, because there's also a big thing with like, you know, it's more than just the classes, it's the other opportunities. It's, you know, as an undergrad, you're going to be able to, you know, be a part of, you know, things going on in the lab, or you're going to be exposed to different kind of projects and things like that are going on that really, you know, add so much to that experience. And that's one of the things that I changed my major several times when I was an undergrad, and actually left at one point because I thought college wasn't for me. And as I said this in my video with you before, came back and took an introduction to archaeology class after I got laid off from the railroad, and I was like, this is it. And the program there did an amazing job of introducing me to different concepts and bringing me into different projects, and I really found, you know, what has become my life now, thanks to just having a good enough program to go that extra mile beyond just the course load.
Yeah.
Something else to ask about is what kind of funding they have available to support field work. That's something I think all of us have benefited from.
John, this is the UK.
There isn't.
That's not applicable here.
No.
Well, okay.
Well,
Yeah,
and the UK a lot of the times
they should think about coming to the States then, but although that kind of funding is getting cut as well. But my point was that most of us, although we love archaeology, don't necessarily have the personal resources to do the travel and go places we need to go. So it's always important to be mindful of what those sources of funding are going to be.
Yeah, well, the UK is really great in that they have, like, the Young Archaeologist Club. Can plug that, is a great resource for getting young people into archaeology, and they have clubs all over the UK. And but a lot of UK universities will have pretty local digs, and you'll be camping and roughing it out a lot of the time. So unlike, for example, my experience where I was in Canada and flying over to Jordan, and it was quite expensive, as you said. They have some pretty budget-friendly options over here. We'll move on to another question, which is for JT. Have they used the same LiDAR technology used to discover ancient Mexican culture sites for discovering more mounds in the eastern United States?
Yeah, so LiDAR has become very popular looking for mound sites. I mean, I use it in my dissertation research. One of the things in the eastern United States is that a lot of mounds were destroyed. So one of the big benefits with LiDAR is, seeing these elevations and get through tree cover and things like that. But kind of unfortunate occurrence that happened due to colonialism in America is, many of these mounds were just completely destroyed, usually leveled as part of agricultural fields and things like that. And so because of that, there's a lot of mound structures that were just completely wiped out. But it's still been useful to identify kind of on a smaller than 10 meter, which is what 10 meters is usually the elevation regarded for this. So looking at LiDAR can give you closer details of finding some mound structures that we thought were destroyed or weren't previously identified, especially along rivers and things like that, to identify sites. So it's still being used, and it is showcasing a lot of things that we previously didn't have, any idea that those things were there, or even rediscovering them. As part of my dissertation research, found a mound that we had thought was destroyed, but there's still some remnants of the mound still out there that we were able to see through LiDAR data. So it's really cool.
Great. Next question is, I'm currently doing my MSc Environmental Science from Liverpool. How can I get into archaeology field as a fresher? This is kind of similar to the one that we just had. I think the only thing I would really add to that is your university probably has an archaeology society that's for students. And you join that and it'll give you lots of opportunities to get involved. There's another good one here, which is, if all of you had an opportunity to completely pivot into another area in archaeology, a different region or a different type of work, what would it be? Hoping this would help me. So who wants to go first?
Well, I'll just say one of the attractive nuisances for me has always been stuff that's online and on the screen. I think that I would become, and it's late in my career, so I'm not going to do this, but I would become a GIS jockey. I would get into image analysis. I think I could really be drawn into that in a very immersive way. And the nice thing about it is that it's fairly portable. You can do it pretty much anywhere that you've got an internet connection. So if you're tied up and can't get out into the field, or it's too expensive to do that, you can still do some amazing work in analyzing satellite data, or analyzing LiDAR data, or analyzing other GIS information. But that's become a really fundamental skill in archaeology now.
Clint, you want to go next?
JT?
Yeah, I can go.
Okay.
If I were to switch, so I think one of the areas I would love to study that I haven't really studied is in France, looking at some of the ancient cultures in France. I'm from Louisiana, so part of my ancestry is, of course, French, and then in Creole indigenous. And so I work on indigenous sites in the U.S., so I would love to be able to go out and look at some of the ancient cultures in there. And I specialize in stone, so I would like to see some metal would be cool. So I focus a lot on hunter-gatherers, so probably, some more agricultural societies out in France that I think would just be really interesting, and something I don't have any experience with, but I'd love to just go out there and be a part of a project one day.
Flint?
Yeah, I also wanted to, you didn't give me a chance to answer the previous question about the environmental science
sorry.
individual, because here at Cardiff, we have an archaeological science MSc degree, and we actually accept a lot of people that have environmental science backgrounds. So having an environmental science background would make you eligible for various programs in archaeological science throughout the UK. So if you are interested in switching over to the dark side and doing archaeology, you actually have a really good background for doing something like biomolecular archaeology. A lot of the students in my MSc biomolecular archaeology class last term were environmental science. They came from an environmental science background. The other half were from archaeology. And so, you have that kind of background to be able to apply what you know to archaeology without a doubt. And speaking about career changes and pivots and things like that, to a certain degree, I'm sort of having one right now. where I'm sort of pivoting from more traditional academic archaeology to doing a lot more public archaeology. Some of that has to do with life circumstances and health, where I don't feel like moving around on a precarious job market. Others are because I had the opportunity to start developing my public communication. I've taken that and I've tried to do that, and it's been somewhat successful in a slow way so far. And so I guess that's my answer. I would start doing more public stuff. I think that I am terrified by the world right now, like many of us. And so I think that we all need to be doing more of this. And I'm trying to push as many of my colleagues as possible to do more on this. And so, because I think we need to combat the ignorance in our world. And I think it's really valuable. And so we need to do a better job of teaching the public, not just our own students. And so that's my pivot.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I think for me, I mean, I don't think it would be a surprise to anybody who's watched my channel. I would be pivoting into Egyptology, because that was originally my first love. I wanted to be an Egyptologist and study ancient Egypt, probably Cleopatra, Nefertiti, or Hatshepsut, one of the big three. I love women's history. That's one of my like niche things that I always used to spend a lot of time looking up, was like historical women that nobody's ever heard of. But yeah, Flint, I kind of similar in that I did commercial archaeology. I officially work my 9 to 5 day to day in marketing now, because archaeology doesn't make very good money or is very sustainable for a family life. But yeah, my channel has recently started to do a lot better than it's done in the past 8 years. So I'm kind of hoping that I can build upon that, and like you said, kind of increase this public perception of archaeology and be part of this movement, fighting against like anti-intellectualism, by also showing that, you know, archaeologists are real people. We come from a variety of different backgrounds. We have for varying levels of education, and, you know, we're not all being paid to cover something up, because if we were, we would all be a lot richer.
Yes.
Let's see. What's another question? What's the next question after this? How has technology impacted the field of archaeology? What new tools and techniques are changing the way we study ancient civilizations? So, I mean, that's just technology is huge.
One of the things that I think is going to totally transform what we do is AI.
Yeah.
Jason Colavito, who many of you know, and I recommend following him, just posted something on X about how AI is being used to decipher Latin scripts. The problem is it will hallucinate and fill in things that aren't there. But there's ChatGPT. Well, OpenAI just sponsored a global competition for using open source data and AI to look for archaeological sites in the Amazon. And they were offering a $100,000 prize. I don't think they've yet announced who the winner was, but essentially you had to demonstrate how you were using AI to interpret publicly available data. And they have, according to my insider information, they have found dozens of very spectacular archaeological sites, including ones with architecture that hadn't been known before. And this information is going to be a big splash relatively soon, just because one of the things that's very important in archaeology is pattern recognition, whether you're looking at bones or chipstone tools or potsherds or satellite imagery or drone imagery. Is just recognizing patterns. I mean, all of us walk around looking at the ground. We spend a lot of time walking around looking at the ground, looking for things that are unusual that we can recognize. And AI does that really, really well. Obviously, it needs to be trained better. But I really think AI is going to completely transform the way we do things in archaeology.
Though I want to say I hate the term AI. It has no intelligence. It's machine learning. And, you know, when Colavito, I'm actually going to cover this, not in my next old news on Sunday, but the one after. It's supposed to fill in the gaps. It's supposed to hallucinate. That's the whole point of that AI, if you will, which is what scholars do as well. So I agree. I think machine learning has a lot of potential, but at the same time, I think we need to recategorize what it is, because we need to understand its limitations. Since I jumped in here, I wanted to point out that like technology means a lot of different things. And so sort of laboratory technology is advancing extremely fast as well. So different ways. I just covered this kind of boar feasts, where they were able to take thin sections of these wild boar teeth, and they were able to get down to day growth of the enamel, day by day, which they could then sample for different isotopes to understand, what's going on week by week as that boar is growing, to understand where it's moving and things like that. And so the level of precision that we're able to get with these kind of technologies, like DNA or isotopes or other kinds of laboratory technologies, is increasing exponentially to the point where we can do this with humans, we can do it with animals, we can start to do it with plants and all kinds of different organisms out there. And so it's really going to revolutionize our understanding of how humans interacted with the environment around them in different seasons of the year, different months of the year, even maybe even different weeks of the year. We'll be able to be like, well, in early March, this is what was happening here. And in late April, that's what was happening there. And that's going to give us a whole different resolution on life in the past.
Yeah. I was going to say, my husband actually has a PhD in machine learning and did a machine learning PhD. So we were just having discussion today about the how people really misunderstand what artificial intelligence is and how they treat it like it's, gospel and like it can't be wrong. And they don't seem to understand that it's still very limited. It's a language model. It's been built by us. And that's really interesting because of the whole SAR-scan pyramids thing. They all talked about how they fed their data into an AI or a machine learning model. They didn't tell which one. They didn't give us any of the questions they asked, etc. And they were and they said that because they gave it to the machine, and this was what the machine spat back out, it can't be wrong. And it's like, it's made by us. Of course it can be wrong. We can be wrong. But technology is going at such a fast pace for archaeology. One of the biggest revolutions that I saw happening in the field back when I was doing lots of field work was the introduction of tablets for recording. So, before that we had, you had your paper record, which got wet, muddy, and, people aren't always good at writing legibly. There's actually someone I used to work with. He is known in my workplace. You had to be able to interpret his writing. It was like it was his own language, and it's just like that's not useful for that's not useful for context sheets when other people are having to write up the reports. So those are all problems. And then you have a photograph which is stored separately, and then you have to match the photograph to the context writer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But so one of the company that I used to work for spent a lot of money developing an app so that they could just hand people an iPad and everything that they were recording on a site was done digitally and everything was linked together. Although they then had interesting problems where apparently they had people putting emojis in their context records and stuff. But so it will come with its own set of limitations and stuff, but that's huge, is the ability to do digital recording and the democratization of all this technology, because before it used to be so expensive to do radiocarbon dating and ancient DNA or get a tablet for the field or get a GPS unit, et cetera, but now it's becoming so much more cost effective for projects to do it. It's giving so much more access to these things for the smaller projects, which I think is great. JT?
Yeah, so to talk about something other than AI, or large language models. In the southeast, in southeastern United States, one of the big things is geophys. Working with a lot of indigenous tribes and things like that, there's, especially in certain areas where they don't want subsurface testing, you can use geophys, GPR, magnetometry, and things like that to identify anomalies. But it's also been very beneficial in locating, as I mentioned, missing mounds. So at Grand Village of the Natchez, for example, there's historical record of the French and things like that, and the number of mounds they were saying was there. And for the longest time, we thought one of the mounds was gone, we couldn't. And instead of just, blindly digging everywhere trying to find it, because river sediment had capped all of it, so you didn't know it was there anymore. Geophys identified it, and so we found the lost mound at Grand Village of the Natchez, and which is a huge deal, and we see that too at Spiro Mounds, for example. It's kind of changing the narrative about it. We found a bunch of temporary structures that they're very thin sheet middens, and if you didn't know that they were there, it's very easy to miss them because there's only 2-3 centimeter feature in the ground, and when you're digging through with a shovel, sometimes you dig 2-3 centimeters at a time. And so, but thanks to geophys and things like that, we're able to see them and then, do more precise excavations and find all these things that are changing a lot of the stories about these mound centers.
I have one question that I got on Instagram, which I thought was a really interesting one, which is, what happens if something strongly contradicts previously known knowledge is discovered? So they didn't provide an example, but the thing that came to mind for me at the moment is the white sands footprints in Arizona. Is it Arizona? Is that, or New Mexico?
New Mexico.
I don't know the states very well. But they're allegedly, I think it's the luminescence dating has said that they're 23,000 years, which obviously goes against the Clovis idea that humans have only been in the Americas since, I think, 15,000 years ago. So my answer to this would be that if you come up with something that upends everything that we know about it, you gotta expect that you are going to have to go through everything that you do is going to be looked at with like the finest tooth of combs. And you're going to have to make sure that your data is incredibly robust to make sure that you actually have found what you think you have found and that you're not just jumping to conclusions. And people are going to challenge it. And contrary to what some people seem to think, like, that's okay. That's how you test science. And ideally, if it is something that upends something that it has previously been pretty well established, then you need to also start looking for other people to be finding similar stuff as well, because an isolated incident doesn't necessarily mean it isn't exactly a case for upending an entire paradigm, I guess, if anybody has anything else to add.
Yeah, I think that's one of the important things too. I think sometimes with these ideas is that people think that a new discovery is arguing against an archaeologist. But this new data needs to make an argument against the data and argument that's already there. And so that's the big thing. And I think the other big thing is I don't think people are aware of how often this does occur. So I usually use Poverty Point, for example. Poverty Point was first said to be built by Mesoamericans. Then the argument was that it was the first chiefdom-level society in America. And then it went to hunter-gatherers, and it was an empty ceremonial center. And then, no, it was a large city. And so these kind of things happen a lot in archaeology. But one of the big things to remember with it is the data that is being generated from these new discoveries needs to be enough to, form a strong argument against the data that's already there. And that usually takes time. There's not a, you can't, as you mentioned, you can't just find one thing and be like, this changes everything. Usually you have to have a strong data set to be able to argue against the previous data sets and things like that.
John?
Yeah, I had the experience during my dissertation research of finding and dating some pottery. We could recognize it by the shape, by the forms and the styles. It was 1,000 years earlier than the pottery that had been documented previously. And my dissertation really was making this argument from context and from comparisons and from other dates that in fact this pottery was 1,000 years earlier than the oldest pottery that was commonly recognized. But it's really hard to do. The sites are very, very rare. And it was really only just this past year that another site from the same period was identified in the same region. And in a gratifying way, the radiocarbon dates, of which there's a bigger suite now, confirmed the earlier dating that I had done back in the 80s. But these things unfold over decades. You can't always muster all the evidence all at once. But as more work is done, as additional projects happen, we become more certain about these claims that we've made. But it doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds over often a really long period of time as as that new data kind of soaks into the field, as more archaeologists are able to consider it and test it and investigate it. It doesn't happen all at once. It takes a lot of confirmation before things become, and even then, they're not set in stone, because the next person may come up with some additional data that changes that. That's just how archaeology works.
I was well, again, to plug, not that I'm trying to plug it, but in the Piers Morgan interview, Jimmy Corsetti thought that he was pulling one over Zahi Hawass by being like, "You've known about the pyramid voids for 9 years. Why haven't you gone into them yet?" And it's like, because that's how archaeology works. Like, these things, like, I think people just don't understand, again, that an archaeological project is often measured sometimes in the decades, if not lifetimes. Like, Giza has been excavated for over 100 years. Like, multiple generations of archaeologists were still not finished digging there. And like the site that I was on in Jordan, we finished digging in 2012, and they've only just published their first monograph. And that's like over, my math is not great. That's over a decade later. So, yeah, and that is just like not to say that it's unimportant, but it's just like kind of a run-of-the-mill average Iron Age site in the middle of Jordan. It's not the most famous archaeological site in the world, arguably. Flint, do you have anything to add?
Yeah,
or JT?
I was gonna say that kind of, look, everything we publish is designed to move the field forward. So you're not publishing something if you're just repeating what's already been said. That's never the goal. So we're always that's the goal of training somebody by writing a PhD. By the end of your PhD, you are the world expert in that little subject that your PhD is on. And so it's always meant to be an original contribution of knowledge. But on the same token, scholarship is built upon consensus. So your entire job there is to convince your colleagues, those of them that research and are experts in this subfield or the field that you're writing in, that what you're saying has merit. And so that's what consensus is built on, which means you need to convince the majority of your colleagues that what you're saying has merit. And that obviously will take time, because they're going to need to A, read it, B, consider it, C, then publish their own thoughts on it, D, then that gets digested. And each of those publications takes years. And so, it's the process of convincing your colleagues that is what makes this science and scholarship. And that's the very difference between science and scholarship, where we try to convince our colleagues, the other experts in the field, versus pseudoscience, where they're trying to convince the public, who are not experts, who do not have experience in this subfields or disciplines, and don't have the ability to judge this knowledge. And so the slowness at which it goes is a feature, not a bug. It's about how scholarship takes place. It's not like that all the time. That's life.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things too, is it takes much longer to analyze than it does to excavate. I can excavate meter by meter and a meter deep in no time at all, but I may collect thousands and thousands of artifacts that I also need to go get radiocarbon data. I need soil samples. I need someone to look at the faunal. And I can take one shovel load and it may have, 20 flakes in there. Well, I have to then look at the platform type, cortex percentage, dorsal scars, termination point for each one of those 20. And it takes a lot longer for me to do that than it goes, huh. And so it takes, 5, 6 to 10 times more time to analyze what you're digging than it does just to dig it. And I think that people need to realize that, and especially as technology grows, I can't do radiocarbon dating at my house. Like that's impossible. I have to send that off to a lab to do. Same thing. I can't do geomorphology of soil matrices. I have to send that off to someone with a high power microscope to look at. Like I can't do that myself. And I think that's something that people need to realize, that it takes time, but it's a good thing. Like Flint was saying, it's a good thing that it takes time, because we need to, have the data and have this analysis to make our arguments. We can't just say, oh, I look up at the sky. Therefore, this site is 10,000 years old.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, guys. I need to get going and eat dinner. I've been streaming for nearly, well, what, I guess 2 hours. So I want to say it was awesome, guys. And next time we'll move faster and publish our results even quicker. And we're going to convince everybody that we're right. Us four right here.
Yeah.
in the meantime, make sure that you ask Grok about Flint Dibble. Grok is doing a pretty good job with that.
Grok definitely knows that I beat Hancock in the debate. That's for sure. And it knows that the liars that lie about me are lying about me. All right. See you all later. Rachel, it was a pleasure. Yeah. See ya.
No.
Well, talking about the time scope of these things, JT was mentioning spiral mounds. And it was just making me remember that when I was in graduate school, I used to have lunch in the office of Stephen Williams, where, and JT will recognize these names, where Ian Brown and Jeff Brain and T.R. Kidder. And we would all sit around and talk about the spiral mound shell gorges. And that was 40 years ago, and we're still talking about these things. We don't understand them completely, but archaeology unfolds over lifetimes. And Spyro is something people have been talking about for what, over 100 years now. It's not something that it's not a project that you do in a week and then have all the results. It takes many people over many decades, and even then there's more to do.
I muted myself again. So I muted myself in the call, but not in the streaming thing. And now people are like, she's muted. What's so funny? What's so funny, guys, is I was telling them that it was the baby and that I muted myself again. So that's fine. I'm unmuted now. You should all be able to hear me talking. Someone else said that when you find a new void inside the most famous pyramid and it takes many years to plan how to find that void, something is wrong. So that should take months and not many years. Again, they're talking about, the Great Pyramids and the void, I disagree with that, because sometimes the technology to do what you want to do doesn't exist and you have to wait for it. And this is a point that I was kind of making on Monday, is that somebody, the one said to me, which was always struck with me, is like, well, if the archaeology doesn't get done, nobody's going to die. And so when you're like stressing about like, oh, I'm not getting that deadline done or whatever, or like this report hasn't been done on time, et cetera, it's like, but nobody's going to die if this doesn't happen. And it's the same thing, I think, with this void in the pyramids, or you broadly apply it to anything, is that if we don't look at the void in the pyramids this month, nobody's going to die. It's been there for 4,500 years, and it can wait to ensure that we have technology that's advanced enough to be able to investigate it without having to harm the pyramid. Because, the only way that they have really been able to do any headway into exploring the pyramids before modern day was dynamite. And by blowing it basically apart from the inside to get to all the relieving chambers and stuff above the king's chamber. And the only reason, and nowadays they just use all those robots that they put in the air shafts and endoscopes. And sometimes, and if they haven't found a crack that gets them into that void, what's the point of drilling into it? If you maybe wait for technology for like a decade or two, maybe you'll have a way of doing it that means you don't have to damage the pyramid at all. And at the end of the day, it's the job of the Egyptians and us as custodians to try and damage. For all that excavation is an incredibly destructive process, we need to try and still preserve what is still there. And something like the Great Pyramid, like, that's our responsibility to be able so that other generations can enjoy it as well. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
I think
Yeah, well, go ahead. No, go, JT.
I think one of the things too is that a lot of people think because they're not fast enough at the with the stuff going on at the Great Pyramids, is that the entire archaeology world should be up in arms. But for me, I researched the Southeast hunter-gatherers during the Archaic and Woodland period. What discoveries happen in Egypt do not impact my work whatsoever. Personally, I'm into hunter-gatherers in small communities, so I think Egypt is overplayed. So, and it's not against anyone that's really into that. That's fine. That's great. But, no one's breathing down my neck that I haven't, excavated the small hunter camp lithic scatter that's, in the middle of the woods somewhere, because a lot of things aren't going to affect others. Now, if they brought some super cheap technology that can scan through things and I just have to, go and it shows all the artifacts underneath it in the dirt for me, yeah, that would impact me. But what's in the void of the pyramids isn't impacting my research. It isn't impacting the communities I work with. I work with local communities, work with indigenous tribes. That what happens in Egypt and at the pyramids with their excavations doesn't impact me. Like it's cool. I would like to know, but it's not. I'm not gonna, bring out the pitchfork and start burning things down because I'm worried about providing information about the past in the area that I can actively impact and actively share with people.
John?
Well, a very wise archaeologist, David Hurst Thomas, once wrote, "Archaeology is not about what you find, it's about what you find out." And I'm constantly seeing headlines about, new discovery rewrites history. And my response, often in a snarky way online, is what does it matter if we're rewriting history if nobody's reading history in the first place? My feeling about ancient Egypt or the Southeast or anything else, why do we need new discoveries if people aren't paying attention to what's already known? Well, if people were really avidly studying Egyptology and people had, all of this knowledge about the Old Kingdom, then, well, yeah, this new tomb chamber would be really interesting because it help add to what we know. But too often it's sort of like the story of the goose that laid the golden eggs. Instead of enjoying each golden egg that gets dropped as archaeology proceeds, they want to kill the goose and get the gold. And in doing that are destroying an archaeological site, destroying a feature or whatever. I would prefer to see people learn more about what archaeologists have already found and what we are already saying, what we already know, before clamoring for some new discovery, which is not going to be that meaningful to most people unless they have some background on what's already known.
Another question is, where did I find it? Is there any way I could get some 3D scans of some spindles so I can do some experiments of my own? I think they asked it before in terms of like 3D printing. I'm not a artifacts expert, but I would say contact a museum that has an example of the of whatever it is that you want to scan, because a lot of museums nowadays are doing 3D scanning of their collections, or they have people who are doing it as a part of their research. So there are researchers out there doing 3D scanning for projects. So I would get in touch with somebody and see if they'll give you their scans.
Yeah, you can also look. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say something to keep in mind about spindles, though, is that the effectiveness of a spindle depends a lot on weight. So having a 3D printed spindles or spindle whirl is not necessarily going to help you with that research, but replication is something that you can do yourself. Get some clay and make some spindle whirls and fire them and do some experiments with them. That's a good way to go as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in addition to kind of key phrases that you could look up other than just 3D scan, is photogrammetry, which is just a ton of pictures of the object and things, and that builds a 3D model of it. So you can also look up the term photogrammetry, and it may provide more more selection in things that you're looking for.
And then here we have, as an archaeology and heritage management post-grad student in India, what opportunities should I look out for if I want to have some experience abroad?
Ooh, that's going to depend on where abroad you'd like to go.
Yeah.
Because I know, for example, a lot of archaeologists in the U.S. would, especially with current political things, would like to transfer. A commercial archaeologist would like to transfer to Europe to do archaeology, but there's, in some countries, archaeologists don't make enough for the visa class to be able to do it.
That's the case in the UK.
And so, which is, I mean, archaeology, you're not getting rich in the U.S., but commercial archaeology, you can definitely live a middle class life. I mean, I do, and my wife's also an archaeologist. But it really depends on where you're trying to go. So my recommendation would be, it would be looking at the heritage laws in whichever place you would like to go, and looking at, because depending on if it's like the US or Europe and things like that, most job market's going to be in cultural resource management, commercial archaeology, and looking at what the work environment is like in those areas. And that may show you a path forward from there.
John?
Well, I was just going to say a good archaeological principle that applies to so many things is to work from the known to the unknown. Begin with those individuals who are doing the kind of research that you think you would like to do, and the institutions that are sponsoring projects similar to what you're interested in. The time that you invest into the research beforehand is going to be so valuable in terms of making choices about what to pursue.
My personal, as somebody who did immigrate from Canada to the UK to work in archaeology, I would definitely say have an idea of what kind of opportunity you're looking for. What does that exactly involve? And what's the job market like over there? And what do you need visa-wise? Because I think this is something that not a lot of people, myself included, really consider. They're like, oh, I just want to go do archaeology in the UK, or I want to go do it in Egypt or whatever. And I see it so much, similarly, JT, of like Americans who want to come over to the UK or who come and study in the UK, and then they're like, well, I want to stay here, and they can't because of the visa situation, because the UK, in case you weren't aware, the government's currently not really keen on lots of immigrants, and archaeology is not like a sector where, again, it's not like an essential service, so they don't really prioritize it for visas, and the starting wages in archaeology aren't enough for a visa. That being said, it's not like it's not possible. People find ways around it. There is a post-grad visa here, so a lot of people will go to school and get a visa on the back of that. I personally got in before Brexit because I have a European passport because of immigrant grandparents. So I really hacked the system, so don't use me as an example. Or sometimes people will meet their spouse over here, they get spousal visas, and then and occasionally people get work visas, but they're not really the norm in commercial archaeology over here. Probably the easiest, like quote unquote easiest, because it's not easy by any stretch of the word. If you were thinking of coming to the UK, or the most transient way for these things is if you're working in academia and you're based in somewhere, but whatever you're working on happens to be in another country. But that's not always possible, or that's not always the case. And yeah, you end up working at a university in a different country in a program that focuses on whatever you cover. So if this person is, for example, is from India, say if they found a university in the UK that has an Indian archaeology program, which I'm not sure if that exists, and come and do a doctorate or a postgraduate degree here, or a postdoctorate project. My brain's not working. Would be the easiest way, quote unquote, to do it. This is an interesting one. I've never heard of this before. are finite element methods used to study archaeological finds to find out about usage. Have either of you heard of that?
So
Oh,
it.
but
Oh, go if you have it. Go ahead.
no. Go ahead, JD.
Um, we do use element analysis. So usually like trace element analysis. I use it for identifying show some chert materials to get source locations. We use it for pottery and things like that. We do both things like PXRF or XRF. We do mass spec different things like that. If I'm remembering correctly, finite element analysis is similar to those, but it's slightly different. So we do a lot of element analysis for things primarily from like the geology field for a lot of things.
Okay. How is archaeology repairing trust with tribes after extractive routes like the Mayo brothers?
So in North America, I can talk about this a little bit. With a lot of tribes, one of the major things is that uh, for a long time the indigenous people weren't a part of the process. Their ancestors, their history were used to build the academic fame of professors, and were managed by United States government, and they were left out of the process for a long time. So one of the major things going in now is collaborative archaeology. And so in a lot of different places, it collaboration also, one of the things I want to mention too is collaboration looks different. Indigenous people, indigenous tribes all have different ideas. Some collaboration is, they want to be, hands-on, they want to be in the field with you. And some, they just want to know what's going on. They just want to be a part of the research and things like that. And in I know some cases where it's just like, okay, go find out wherever you want there. We just want to know once you finish type of things. So in my research, one of the big things for me is bringing back kind of like meanings of the landscape and things like that. So site descriptions. I'm working with a native language revitalization project for the Caddo Nation on describing the sites instead of just in English, but also in Caddoan. So that way, we can get back pieces of that. And then I speak Choctaw. And I work with a lot of Muskogee speaking tribes, and I think that's really a lot of students now today, a lot of like incoming students. That is a major focus of theirs, is wanting to be more collaborative. It's not where I think it should be, at least in the Southeast, but it's getting much better, especially with the younger generations coming in and focusing on it as like a step one process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that it's just consultation. You can't consult enough with the tribes. We're also beginning to see trained indigenous archaeologists at the University of Kansas. We have Carlton Shield Chief Gover, and I'd like to put a plug in for his book that he wrote. He co-edited with Emily Van Alst. It's called Indigenizing Archaeology. Just came out earlier this year or late last year. I can't remember which, but read the works by indigenous archaeologists and listen to what they're saying. That's going to be the next step, is to have indigenous archaeologists who are researching their own cultural heritage and working closely with others to do that too. And then, of course, repatriation is a very big part of that. We actually have 3 different NAGPRA specialists at my university who are busy repatriating or working on repatriation of not only North American materials, but also materials from around the world.
Yeah, one of the kind of movements that are going on currently in kind of the Caddo areas, which is the region where Caddo and like Wichita and things are affiliate tribes. We're also renaming types, archaeological types. So we talked about spiros several times. So one of the patterns on pottery was called spiro engraved. But through collaboration with Caddo Nation, it was renamed into Iwi engraved, and Iwi in Caddoan is eagle. And there's a lot more indigenous archaeologists that are coming out, and so in North America, there's a tribal historic preservation officer, and that's kind of the consultation kind of begins with them from different areas. And a lot of those are, trained archaeologists. They're not just, just members of the tribe, but they're trained archaeologists. And in some cases, there's like Osage Nation, for example, have, archaeology teams, not just one archaeologist. They have, a dozen archaeologists working for just the tribe. Choctaw Nation is another who has a large number of archaeologists working for the tribes themselves. So the tribes themselves are getting more and more archaeologists that their sole purpose is an archaeologist for the tribe.
Mm-hmm. Very
And
cool.
I think I think JT mentioned the renaming, but that can sometimes get kind of tricky. This summer, not long ago, I visited the Plum Bayou site, Plum Bayou Mounds, which was renamed from Toltec Mounds. And I had early on had a question: well, why are you giving this indigenous site an English name? But it turns out that the site's history is contested by several different tribes, and it was less problematic to give it an English name, Plum Bayou, than to use a name from one of the indigenous languages, because that would have shut out the others who also were identifying the site as relevant to their history. So it's very complicated and usually involves consultation with more than one tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is really complicated, but doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done. Obviously.
Yeah, Plum Bayou is actually a really good case. Paige Ford, who's the archaeologist out there, is a good friend of mine. And it does take, in a lot of cases, it does take, you're talking to multiple tribes. When things are going on, like at Moundville in Alabama, for example, that's at least 10 tribes that you're going to be talking to in a lot of cases. And as I mentioned earlier, not all tribes think the exact same. Like they're just like everyone else. And I think that's one of the big things too, is that people think a lot of the time that, all indigenous people think the same way, or the tribes all think the same way and everything like that. But there's a lot of variety there. And so consultation and collaboration usually take a long time, because, it's a process. You're working with a lot of different people. So it's a rewarding process in my opinion, though, because it adds a lot to our understanding of the past.
Yeah. I was just also, because you're just going to say, everyone, if you are really interested in a lot of what JT is talking about, I meant to mention earlier, but he has his own YouTube channel. And I'm just going to plug it. So it's called Actual Archaeology with JT. I'm going to put it in the chat just now if you feel like following him and subscribing. He makes lots of cool videos on his channel. I've interviewed him as well on Inside Archaeology as well about his history of getting into archaeology, which is a great interview if I do say so myself. So that's in the chat just there now. Next question is if you could solve just one of archaeology's mysteries, what would it be? John, do you want to go first?
Oh man, I don't really care for the word mystery. I mean, I pointed out, we don't really talk that much about the mystery of cancer, for example, but there's a lot about cancer that we don't know, but that's just not a language that's used in cancer research all that much. And the same is true for archaeology. There are things that we know quite a bit about, but they're not really mysteries. They're things which we're accumulating more and more knowledge about, just like anything else in science. And the mystery of DNA, for example, it's not that mysterious anymore. There are lots that we still don't know. But for me, again, getting back to my own research, the most interesting topic I find in what I look at is the relationships between the different tribes, different ethnic groups, and different populations in the Americas. Part of the reason why I'm focusing on this American Mediterranean, the Caribbean, is that it's sort of like the Mediterranean, only it's got two Niles. It's got the Mississippi River in the north, and it's got the Orinoco River in the south. And people who could travel by dugout canoe around the Antilles and around Central America could also go up the rivers and up the river systems. They could go up the Mississippi and up the Ohio. They could go down into the Orinoco or the Amazon. And I like to point out that Columbus arrives in 1492, and by 1541, the Spanish are up the Mississippi. They've crossed the entire continent of South America. Just in the space of 50 years, the Spanish have covered an enormous amount of the Americas into the Southwest. So how is it even credible that people who've been living there for thousands of years, or maybe tens of thousands of years, were not also traveling around and didn't also understand their landscape in even more detail and nuance? And just because we don't have necessarily an object that was transported from here to there doesn't mean that the people of northern South America were not familiar with Poverty Point, or were not familiar with Spiro, and vice versa. And so, among things I find really fascinating are things such as the similarities between copper work that's happening at Cahokia in the American Southeast and the gold work that's happening in Central America and Northern South America. They're working different metals, but they're both portraying birdmen. That's one of the common representations. And it's not really a mystery. It's something we still don't know well enough. But what is this? What kinds of communication were happening about these ancient ideas of powerful birdmen, or transformation into birds, or people who are kind of part animal, part bird? It seems to be very widespread. Yes, one explanation is that everybody's observing birds and everybody wishes they could fly. But on the other hand, I think that there was a lot more interaction going on in the ancient Americas. And that's one of the things I find really interesting.
Oh, you don't think that they were just birdmen helping them build all the monuments?
Well, that's also a possibility. Those guys from the bird planet,
Yeah.
the extraterrestrials with big wings. That's why you get angels and winged beings all over the place, right? It's from the winged aliens.
Yeah. JT, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so this one is a hard one for me because, like I mentioned, I'm Creole, so I would like to know what happened to a lot of the indigenous people, like the Pascagoula, for example. Their language is unknown. We just have one French explorer that mentioned that they exist, but nothing about their language. So I would like to go back and see some of that, but I think it would also be kind of really rough for me to see at the same time. So it would kind of be a blessing and a curse at the same time. So.
Mm-hmm. There's so many quote unquote mysteries. I would really like to know what the Antikythera was actually used for.
I was just looking at it a few days ago. I was in the museum in Athens having a look at it. It's not as big as people often think. It could probably fit in the palm of a hand, but because of the interest in it, there were 2 rooms that had great big panels that were devoted to this.
Mm-hmm.
But most people don't know the word orrery, Orrery.
Mm-hmm.
Sounded kind of weird to pronounce, but it was probably an orrery, which is basically a device that's used to replicate or well, I think replicates the best, the movements of celestial objects, or things that were thought to be on the celestial sphere, looking at the movements of the sun and the moon and planets and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably what they were doing with it.
Mm-hmm. I had on the back of that, I have a question, which I thought of for us all, which might be interesting to the viewers, we'll see, is what is your favorite archaeological site that you visited as a tourist? So mine is probably always the answer is probably always going to be Petra in Jordan, because it's massive, it's huge, and there's so much to see there, and you can kind of go off the beaten path a bit, which is really fun. So like if you have the stamina for it, you can take a few hundred steps to go up and see some incredible views of the valley. And the Nabateans themselves are really fascinating people. And the site is, it has like people working there selling you stuff and whatever, but it's not like overly touristified, if you know what I mean. I think the only other site that I've been on that is of a similar size is either Giza or Pompeii, and like Pompeii was good, but I don't know. Like I think Petra is my favorite archaeology. I've been there 4 times, and I was supposed to go back a 5th time about a year ago, but it didn't happen. So, but that's the place that I would always return to as an archaeologist. I absolutely love it.
Well, my favorite place I just visited last week, so it's my new favorite place. I'd never been there
Okay.
before, but I went to the Parthenon on the Acropolis in Athens, and the site in combination with the new site museum, which was actually built to house the Elgin marbles when they're
Mm,
ultimately returned to Greece by the British Museum. The combination of those two is just amazing. I mean,
mm-hmm.
the location of the site, the deep history that's there, the multiple layers of stories that go from its construction by the ancient Greeks to its destruction by the Turks to its looting by the British and all of that. It just tells such a rich story of human experience over time. And the Greeks have done an amazing job with the Parthenon Museum, which I could spend hours in.
Mm.
Just the quality of the material that's there and the way that it's displayed and the stories that it tells. I'd never been there before, but I highly recommend a visit to the Parthenon in Athens.
JT?
So I have actually not been to that many archaeological sites that I have gone just as a tourist because I haven't had a lot of travel money. So mine would be because like I've worked at Poverty Point, I've worked at Spiro, so those are like the big ones. I've worked at with collections from Moundville and stuff like that. Emerald Mound. So no one probably knows about this, but
I've been to
uh,
Emerald Mound. It's
yeah,
it's an impressive place.
yeah, it's a huge platform mound that on top of it had other mounds. And so it's just a really neat concept to me that, we have a lot of platform mounds, especially during the Mississippian period in the Southeast, but this is a massive platform mound that had other mounds put on top of it. So you just have this huge elevated platform for different individuals or different structures to be on top of. So it's a really cool, and not a lot of people see it. And it's not like a museum or anything. You just kind of drive right up to it out in the middle, kind of nowhere near Natchez, Mississippi.
Well, but it's a nice drive along the Natchez Trace, which
Hmm.
itself is a beautiful drive.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's if you're in visiting in Mississippi and Louisiana, there's a Mississippi Mound Trail. So it's got a path, a driving path that you can go by, and there's kind of a several. I think it's 24 different mound sites that you can see by driving through the through that route.
Oh, that's
And,
cool.
and that reminds me, if you can't make it to Greece, you can go to Nashville, Tennessee, and you can see a full scale reproduction of the Parthenon, which is also pretty impressive to see. And I'm a big fan of replicas of archaeological sites. I think Lascaux II, which is a full scale reproduction of Lascaux, is good. I would like to see more reproductions of archaeological sites in places
Mm.
that are accessible to people to see. I mean, you don't need to impact Stonehenge anymore. Come on, let's just make a 3D reproduction of it, and people would enjoy that as well. I just
Mm.
think, and I feel the same way about Göbekli Tepe, for example. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about how heavily that site has been impacted by being engineered for accommodating hundreds of thousands of tourists. Why not just make a replica site in some alternative
Mm.
location and then direct all the tourists to see that, rather than having an impact on the actual archaeological site?
Yeah, I mean, we need to. Maybe we should just come up with like an archaeological fair, like a Renaissance fair. Everybody dresses up, and like you go to or like medieval times. Like I used to love going to that when I was a kid. And here in Scotland, actually, there's a site up north that's called the Crannog Centre. So Crannogs are artificial mounds made in lochs that host, like, I think they're an Iron Age house on top. And these people, they made one out in the middle of Loch Tay, It unfortunately burned down a few years ago, but they've relocated the entire thing and they're building like an Iron Age village on the shores of Loch Tay in Scotland, with a couple roundhouses on the shore, and then they're trying to build a couple crannogs out on the lake, and it's going to be really cool once I think it's completely finished, or they have finished a few buildings so far. But I agree with you. Like, I love replica stuff. Or like being able to like step in somewhere and feel like you've stepped backwards in time. Like, I think that's a really interesting opportunity for when you put the headset on with the video games.
VR.
VR, virtual reality. There you go.
Oculus.
Yes, like VR, being able to like that. I don't play the Assassin's Creed video games. But I bought the one that's set in Egypt, which has a mode where you can just walk around like it's Cleopatra's era Egypt in the game. You don't actually have to play the game. You can just basically walk around the setting of the game. And I would love to live that in VR. That would be great.
One of the places that's on my bucket list, Rachel, and I'm curious to know whether you've been there, is Skara Brae up in the Orkneys.
No, I have not.
That looks like such an amazing place to see. And I recently, one of the things I've been playing with is I had my own DNA analyzed, and I had my autosomal and also my Y chromosome DNA analyzed. And apparently, I have some similarities with some of the ancient DNA that's been recovered from Skara Brae. So, something also that's becoming a dimension of my own archaeological tourism is kind of seeing some places, then imagining my actual genetic ancestors in those places. And Skara Brae is one of them.
That's actually an excellent segue into this next question that I've picked out, which is, what's the opinion on putting all archaeological genetic samples of humans into a shareable database?
It's happening already. Go to mytrueancestry.com. They've got over 12,000 samples in their database.
Oh.
And you can explore some of it for free. Obviously, more of it as they actually charge you for different levels of access. But they're every week they're adding new samples, and it's really a kind of remarkable service. It's based in Switzerland. And people have complained that they don't reveal their algorithms and that it's not 100% transparent how they're making their matches. But it's nonetheless an interesting idea, and they've been using all of this published data on ancient DNA. All of the information they've included is coming from published sources, and so you can actually find similarities between your DNA and ancient DNA, and then you can track down the literature on it and actually read about the actual archaeological context from which those samples have come. It's really pretty remarkable. mytrueancestry.com.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look that up. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sources like that, and I think, or a lot of sources that have ancient DNA. I mean, most researchers, if they do ancient DNA analysis and for archaeological purpose, they're doing it to publish on. So I think that's and in a lot of cases that information is already out there. The only kind of like caveat I have to it is, when the analysis was done without consent, without consultation, without things like that, in a lot of cases, especially earlier archaeology and things like that, it was a very colonial process. Archaeologists went out and, researched what they wanted and did what they wanted to do, regardless of where they were or who they were and things like that. So I think that it's important still to kind of remember that history. And so as we're going forward, but in most cases, if archaeologists did ancient DNA analysis, it's usually like they're going to publish it somewhere. They're not going to be running that analysis without consent. Mm-hmm. So most of the time aren't going to be running that analysis without consent now. And usually a lot of that comes back with publications and dissertations and theses and things like that to work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's also important not to confuse genetics with identity. People I know who are natives of Scotland think it's ridiculous that I think that I'm at all Scottish, even though my DNA indicates something like 30% from Scotland. And the same is also true for tribal identity. We saw that happen with Elizabeth Warren. Just because you've got a little bit of indigenous DNA doesn't mean that you are recognized as a member of say the Cherokee or the Choctaw or whatever nation we're talking about. Genetics does not equal identity, and it's up to the tribes themselves to decide how they're looking at issues like blood quantum, which is different from genetics, and history, in order to identify people who have a legal affiliation or legal membership or ability to have a legal membership. And unfortunately, people are confusing genetics with that, and it's not the same thing.
Yeah, good points. I don't really know much about genetics. I think I would love to do an ancestry DNA test, but as I said, my husband works in machine learning and data privacy and stuff like that, and he's like, don't give your DNA to people.
Well, the main risk is that your DNA may be found at a crime scene, and they'll misidentify you as the perpetrator, and then you're in hot
Yeah.
in a difficult shape.
Yeah. Well, my thing is, I just got to buy it for like my mom and my dad, because I'm just one generation removed. So if I get them to do it, it's fine. They'll just be my scapegoats.
Well,
It's fine.
for what it's worth, I had both. I had my autosomal DNA analyzed. I had both of my parents' autosomal DNA identified, and I have now found over 200 direct ancestors using a combination of genealogy and genetics. I'm constantly trying to tweak it and find confirming documents and other types of things. But I found it really pretty interesting to explore, especially since I've spent my whole career looking at indigenous peoples of Central and South America, and I have no DNA there at all. It's not my own heritage at all. I've been looking at it for other reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is kind of a general one, which is, what do you love most about archaeology?
I would instantly say the brotherhood and sisterhood of archaeologists around the world. I mean, like a lot of other things that are kind of quirky, archaeologists share a lot of common experiences, a lot of common motivations, a lot of common ways of thinking. And what I most enjoy about archaeology is encountering an archaeologist from Japan or China or Australia or Spain or Italy or wherever, and just this recognition. Oh, they're a lot like me in terms of what we do, and we can strike up interesting conversations and discuss how we got interested, and it sort of enters you into this. And again, I don't want to say club or cabal or conspiracy or anything like that. But there is a brotherhood and sisterhood of archaeologists around the world, which we all of us who work in this online environment are seeing and appreciating. And I would just encourage as many of us as can to use the tools of language translation to reach out to those people who may not have English, may not have, and you may not have their language either. But AI and other tools are making it so easy to communicate with somebody in another language. That's something I'm determined to do more of, is to communicate with people who don't have any English at all. I don't have any Greek at all, or Chinese or whatever. But these tools make it really easy to communicate with other people online.
JT?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I grew up in outdoors, and so I kind of like just being out. Luckily, I work in the Southeast. I don't think I could ever work in the Southwest or the Plains because I need to be around trees. So part of it is I just like being outdoors. I kind of like, just the physical labor part of it. I enjoy that aspect. Also the camaraderie. I mean, there's nothing like being stuck out in the middle of nowhere with the same 10 people for weeks or months on end. You're going to get kind of close. And the other part of it, I really enjoy kind of seeing these glimpse into the past when we're doing the research, or we're analyzing artifacts and things like that. Is to think about that, this is part of people's past. This is part of their lives. Like these are moments in people's lives and things like that. And it kind of even like changes how I think about the if I drop a quarter or something like that, and if 2,000 years from now someone picks it up and things like that, I study a lot of debitage, and one of the biggest things archaeologists study is trash. Like so. And so because of that, it kind of even changes kind of how I look at things present, because of how much time I spend trying to from those objects getting a glimpse into people in the past and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I think.
Well, if I could
Sorry,
just say
go
one
ahead.
more thing about that, one of the things that, and JT's comments made me think of this, one of the things that I think is a common characteristic of archaeologists is that we all know that archaeology is 90% boring as hell, whether you're walking a transect or doing an excavation or working your way through 20,000 potsherds, it's incredibly boring. But
Mm,
what helps us to deal with that is that we can create in our heads and in our minds and in our hearts and in our souls these these worlds of other people in which we're imagining how they lived every single day, how they related to each other, how they got their food, how they made their tools, how they and so we don't mind the boredom because we're experiencing this ancient world in our heads, and it's an ancient world that is consistent, or not consistent, that's logical, that makes sense. But I get into arguments with people who love things like Game of Thrones, and I've never been able to stand it because I can't take the anachronism. It's like you can't have a book before you have these other types of things. So having somebody haul out and open up a book, it's like, no, they didn't have that. They would have used a scroll, or they would have used something else.
mm,
But the past makes sense, and those of us who are archaeologists work through that logic of how the past unfolded on a regular basis.
mm-hmm.
And so, for me, a book in Game of Thrones is as anachronistic as having Jesus driving a pickup truck. It just doesn't fit.
Good answers. Good answers. I would say, for me, what I like is a bit of a combination where, John, like you were saying, and as I kind of was saying before, like the sense of like camaraderie, where you meet an archaeologist in the wild and you instantly have something in common with somebody and you're just like instantly friends. I really love that, how you just you have found your people and your people are everywhere.
Yeah, well, just a couple days ago, I just got back from this trip in Greece, and we went to a Neolithic site called Sesklo, and there was an archaeology team excavating there, and I walked up and struck up a conversation with the archaeologist, and we were instantly discussing, the methods they were using, the features that they were finding. It was really just
Mm-hmm.
wonderful, and that happens a lot.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say that I love is just, I mean, as much as cheesy as it sounds, it's like the thrill of discovery. That, like, I don't know, it's just the adrenaline rush when you pull something out of the ground and you know that nobody else has touched it for however long it's been. I remember very distinctly on I think it was my first dig in Jordan, and I can't remember exactly which artifact it was, but I was excavating something and it was like important. It wasn't just, a few potsherds that had been found in the sift. And our dig director came over to me as I was doing it, and she just looked at me and she's like, "It's addictive, isn't it?" And I was just like, yeah, I could get high on this. Like, I could do this all the time. And it's just, there's just no other feeling quite like it, to know that what I was touching something that somebody hadn't touched for like over 4,000 years sometimes. It's just, which boggles your mind. I one time drove from, in my work, I was driving some prehistoric pottery, so again, things that are thousands of years old, from an office down in England up to the office up in Scotland on the motorway, and we just had it strapped into the front seat of the car, and I was like, I'm driving beside something that's 4,000 years old right now. This is really throwing me for a loop. Okay, so okay, what's this one? What was your first find? What was the first thing that you ever found whenever you started doing archaeology?
Mine was a flake. It was not very exciting. And for those that don't know, a flake is just a piece of material from the stone material that gets taken off when you're making a stone tool of some kind. Funny enough, and I think I actually said this in the when you interviewed me is I have not found. I specialize in stone tools, and I have not found a projectile point since I've become a professional archaeologist. And it is never me. It is always the person who comes in right after I was in the unit, or I was walking a transect one time. So transects are we just these lines that were separated out, and had someone 10 meters to the side of me, and they found 7 on theirs, and I found 0. I did find 3 flakes though. So yeah, a flake was the first discovery, which they're kind of like the most numerous artifact, so it's not that rare. But I'm into
But you didn't forget
tools.
it.
Yeah, I'm into stone tools, so it works.
John?
Well, mine was when I was in. It was the summer after my junior year in high school. Actually, it was the spring of my junior year in high school. My very first dig was at St. Mary's City in Maryland, which is a 17th century colonial occupation. And my very first discovery, which was kind of cool, was scraping with a trowel and finding a post mold. It wasn't an artifact; it was just a circle of dark earth in the ground. But it's pretty significant because it tells you that there was architecture that were standing there. And a post mold, for those who don't know what that is what happens when a post rots and becomes and the hole in which had been placed becomes filled in with a different type of earth, or sometimes a combination of the organic material from the rotted post and the earth. But basically, it has a different texture because it was excavated into the substrate, whatever that is. But it can often be very subtle. You just see a slight change in color, and by scraping it, you kind of come across it. But the idea that something like an abandoned structure or an abandoned post had left a permanent signature in the ground for almost 400 years was one of the things I just found super impressive. And, archaeologists deal with this all the time. You don't think when you build a campfire, when you're camping, that you're necessarily doing anything permanent, because you make a campfire and then you leave camp whenever you leave. But every campfire can potentially create a signature in the ground that can last for thousands, tens of thousands, or millions of years, depending on where it's made. So you really, what I found profound about this post mold was the realization that not only are you reaching out and touching the past, but that people in the past, or people today, people anytime, are doing things that create a permanent alteration of the physical environment in a way that can last. So the stuff that we do today, the stuff that you did this morning, the trash that you threw out, not long ago, could still be there thousands of years in the future for somebody to come.
I hope no archaeologist has to go through all the diapers that I'm currently having to throw out. So. My first find that I remember is my first year in Jordan. The site we were working on was an Iron Age tell, or it was an Iron Age settlement, which is tells in the Middle East are like, they were started off as a natural hill, but then they get built into an artificial hill and they have a settlement on it usually. But the semi-unique to that site is that it also, before we even reached the Iron Age material, and one particular part of the site, you would tend to come across medieval Muslim burials and of like nomadic Bedouin from that era, presumably. And so we knew to kind of look out for them, but this is like the first couple weeks. This is the first time I touched a trowel. I was still learning everything of what to do. And I was digging one day in my corner of my square, and I found this rock, and it was so pretty. And it was like triangular shaped, and that was kind of black on the outside, but then the one side had this like really vibrant blue like streak running through it through the middle. And I was just like, oh, this is really pretty. I was like, I'm going to put this in my tiny little pretty rock collection to ask if I can take it home with me as a souvenir. So I put it to the side. And then, maybe like a half hour later or something like that, our dig director comes over and I'm just like, oh, look at this pretty rock that I found. Can I take this home with me? Like, it's so nice. And she just looks at it and she's like, That's a piece of a glass bracelet, which means that we probably have a medieval burial in the vicinity here, and that is not what you think it is, so no, you cannot keep it. And sure enough, later, I think it was either later that day or in the next day or two, we found the rest of that bracelet and the person that it belonged to, which subsequently also started my fascination with human skeletal material, which is how I ended up with a degree in it. So it was very formative for me. And it's actually, those bracelets have also been published. They did a little study of them, because the woman that it was belonging to that we found had several. There were these glass bangles that are really distinctive for that period. So it's, and I have the journal that it's been published in, and I can look at it and be like, that's my bracelet, which I think is really cool. I also just, speaking of stuff that's been published, I worked on a site in the UK up near Dundee called Carnoustie, and it's had a Bronze Age weapons hoard that we found on a Friday afternoon right before we were supposed to start packing up to leave work. That had a spearhead with a little bit of gold, which is the only time I've ever come across it in the field. And it also has the largest Neolithic timber hall in Scotland, was found on the same site, and they've just published the full thing, and I was just looking into it. It's going to be on Archaeology, the next Archaeology news. They've just published the full site, and the collection is in the National Museum of Scotland, so I'm really hoping that someday soon I'm going to be able to go see it in a museum and pose next to something that I didn't directly find it, because it was the machine that found it that was scraping off the topsoil, but still, it's really cool. So actually, that brings me on to my next question, which, have either of you found gold while you've been doing archaeology? Because this is a myth that I like to dispel.
Well, I've actually published quite a lot on gold. If you look at my publications, I have 3 different books that deal with gold, and that's one of the things that I specialize in. But the answer to that is archaeologists don't find gold all that often. It's only happened to me once. And this was excavating a prehistoric cemetery in northwestern Costa Rica. And there was a burial. And actually, I wasn't the one who excavated. I was with the person who was excavating it. He said, "Come over here, have a look at this." And it was a very small gold pendant in the form of a bird that had actually been placed in the mouth of the individual who had been buried there. And there's actually an interesting story that goes along with that burial. Actually, we recovered the gold artifact and took that away right away. But it was found towards the end of a day, and we wanted to come back and do the excavation more carefully the next day. And so we put a tarp over it. And when we came back the next day and lifted up the tarp, there was a coral snake, one of the most dangerous snakes in Central America, sitting right on the stone at the head of this burial. It's like, oh, here's the guardian of this grave. They're not happy that we took the gold bird away. But that's the only time I've ever found gold in the field.
No,
JT?
haven't found any gold. I do want to. You mentioned something. I think it's a funny kind of trend in archaeology. Is everyone it's always as the project is wrapping up that you find the most interesting things, because then it turns into, okay, we have a day to now get everything we can about this interesting thing, because we won't be here for another year. No, I haven't. The Southeast pre-contact, pre-colonialism we didn't really have gold. There's copper, and then most of my historic excavations have been on World War II military bases, so of soldier barracks and things like that. So they're not taking a round of bars of gold or anything.
Gold teeth, maybe.
Yeah. I don't think most of them could afford the gold teeth. So no, I've never found any gold. Who knows? Maybe I'll find gold before I find.
Before you find a projectile point, yeah. That'll be the joke. Yeah,
Well,
I know.
I have a student who's currently working on what is probably the biggest excavation with gold artifacts under excavation right now. And people do occasionally find lots of gold in situ. It's an archaeological site called El Caño,
Oh, yes.
ELCANO, in central Panama.
Hmm.
And it's probably producing the largest number of gold artifacts of any site in the Americas right now. And they have a really excellent website. Julia Mayo is the principal investigator there, but you can go to the El Caño, Fundación El Caño website, and it's just an amazing place. They're finding all kinds of wonderful things.
I spoke to their osteoarchaeologist for Archaeology News a year ago about one of their discoveries, I believe. I'd have to look a bit more in depth through my scripts, but I've spoken to them. I remember that site. It is really cool.
It's a cool site, but the bone preservation is not the greatest.
Yeah.
It's below the water table, so it's actually
Yeah.
below water every year, and that's just not very good for skeletal remains
No.
or human remains or animal remains. Any type of bone just becomes very mushy.
Biological material, yeah. Let me just see if I can find it. El Caño, yeah, Alexander Hancock. Yes, Anyway, yeah, that's such a 7 degrees of separation. Yeah, but JT, you're right. Like, we found it. What was it? So it was the last day of the first week that we were on this site, and they were building 2 football pitches for the local high school. And we were stripping the topsoil off with a machine, and they had actually sent around a reporter from the local newspaper who was doing just a feature on the football pitches themselves and taking some so awkwardly posed pictures of archaeology. Like, that's another thing that I always find really interesting is like whenever I look at archaeology news stories, which is a lot because it's something I do for my channel, is I always get a giggle whenever I see archaeologists very deliberately posed, like looking at something, being like, what is this? Oh my goodness, it's so fascinating. Because it's just like, oh my god, a photographer has just entirely like really set this photo up. I think they have one of me and I was holding like a piece of pottery being like, oh, look at this. It was so awkward. So this reporter and photographer had been on site, and they were literally packing up their car. And the bucket scraped back, and the person who was watching it saw this line of green in the soil and was like, stop what you're doing, and stuff like that. And then we went up to the reporter, we were like, you're going to want to see this. And they got to be on site while we were first uncovering it and stuff like that. But then we were also like, oh, crap. This means we need to hire security. This is going to be all over the news, like, by the time we leave site tonight. So then it was a huge rush to block excavate it, wrap the whole thing in about 6 packs of saran wrap, lift it on a shovel, put it in the back of the truck, and bring it back to the lab so that it could be properly excavated overnight. And we had to hire a security person that day to watch the site overnight so that we weren't at risk for looting, which was crazy.
One of the sites I was excavating for my dissertation, the beginning of the project was just doing a 50 bytes, which are 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter squares, holes going down, and wasn't finding anything really interesting. And like, I knew there was a site there, but we weren't finding like anything groundbreaking. Last day, discover this like earth oven feature, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then so we're trying to work on that, and then another set of excavators found another one with like an hour left. And I was like, well, I am completely out of the grant I just received now, so we won't be able to excavate this. But we know it's here now. So that's a common trend in archaeology.
Mm-hmm. It always happens at 3:00 on a Friday, and you're like, I thought I was gonna be able to go home early today. Anyway, we're in the last 15 minutes, so I just want to take a second to say to the chat, if anybody has any burning questions to ask us, you got to put them in now, or else they're not going to be answered. But thanks so much for all the questions that you had so far. Thanks, guys, for coming on and staying on for so long as well. I appreciate it. And thank you to the baby for not actually waking up and just, like, I don't know, having a nightmare or something like that. It's always a bit of a dicey situation because, yeah, sometimes she's usually a very, very good sleeper, but every once in a while she likes to throw a curveball my way. So, yeah. Are there any questions that you guys either get asked a lot or you think is a good question for people to ask archaeologists?
Well, I'd like to address something. I still don't have the right answer for this, and JT knows that we go around on this all the time. I used to spend a lot of time answering questions about archaeology for people online. I've been a heavy social media user for a couple of decades now, it seems. But I have taken my Facebook profile to friends only. My profile on X is currently also restricted. And I have actually stopped answering a lot of questions from the general public online because I got so heavily trolled. I was an early critic of, and have been an early critic of Graham Hancock, and I just did not want to put up with all of his watchdogs, his bulldogs, all of these individuals who are not asking questions in a genuine and honest way. They're asking questions to troll archaeologists, and it's become really difficult for all of us because we would love to answer questions from the general public. We'd love to do something like this, but unfortunately, when we do it in an open context, we just get inundated and often assaulted online in really unfriendly ways by these very hostile trolls who are essentially making money off of rage baiting. And I'm kind of curious as to what the answer to that is, because I would love to be able to do this on a more regular basis and answer questions about archaeology and talk about what I love. But I really don't want the exposure to the trolls. It's something that diminishes the quality of my life, and I just don't want more of that. And I know JT puts up with this too. He's been far, far, far more tolerant than I have. I just block these guys, but JT actually engages with them. But we all know what we're talking about, and JT experiences a lot of that in really unpleasant ways. And the question is how we can reach out to the general public, as Flint is doing, without exposing us to all of this hate and all of this what basically is exploitation of our goodwill for the financial benefit of these professional trolls.
Yeah, so I will say one of the big things that I hear from a lot of people that are like Graham Hancock fans and everything like that is they want someone to reach across the aisle. But if I'm being honest, it is almost impossible to do that, because just being an archaeologist, because of the things that have been said about archaeologists, and don't get me wrong, we could all probably spend days talking about like critiquing the faults of archaeologists and everything like that. But what it becomes is that because I'm an archaeologist, I am already the enemy. So it's almost impossible to try to reach across the aisle, because I'm already framed as this enemy that's hiding the truth and doing all these things and attacking and have all these beliefs as if there's this like hive mind of archaeology that no one can think differently, which is kind of weird, because if you ever go to a conference, you'll see 20 presentations that are all making different arguments about the same site. But one of the things I think is actually really beneficial are things like this, where we're getting the trolls aren't, if they do come to the channel and things like that, their feedback, there's like shut down immediately. And so then it just promotes people who have general interest in it and things like that. But on things like, especially X, and things like that, it's a war zone. It beats you down. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I feel like I have a lot of patience, but some days I feel like it's because you just get constantly barraged with all kind of comments constantly, um, and then a lot of the I'll say a lot of the content creators that are and I don't think it's naturally wrong or anything like that to believe in Atlantis or anything like that. But the ones that are like content creators that push that, they have a strong like anti-archaeology narrative that they need. And so because of that, they poison the well kind of instantly, where every archaeologist or everything like that is kind of just doing what they can to beat down this idea of what that if you're an archaeologist, you're a bad person instantly.
Yeah.
And so I think platforms like this and where like YouTube and things like that, where the talking and the negotiation like this are in a much better atmosphere or a lot better place and a better way to do things.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we need to start hosting these like you said, these conference things where we have all the different papers that are all the different viewpoints but of the same topic, and we just have the archaeologists on here arguing against each other to just be like, look, we don't all agree, there's not a collective. I would say like I mean, I've been quote unquote lucky in that I think partially because my channel isn't quite big enough to attract a huge amount of trolls, and I've never been heavily present on Twitter. I've just kind of like barely used it to promote my videos. I've never really engaged with that crowd very much. And like I've done a few videos on my channel about pseudoscience stuff, but it's by far and large not like the majority of my content. So that's not what people are coming to my channel to talk to me about. And so it does mean that a lot of the time that they get like drowned out by everybody else. And as somebody in the chat pointed out, for forums like this, having a good moderator who's not actively participating in the call, who can just be like, nope, 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 because you can curate it. It's my channel. They're free to come here and they're free to say what they want, but I'm also free to be like, no, we're not going to take this question. So yeah, like I'm lucky in that I haven't been inundated with that stuff yet. And, maybe that will come one day soon, but I also just don't have time for it. I don't know. I've been doing YouTube for 9 years, and I think it's just kind of taught me that it's like I don't really care what a random person on the internet thinks about me, and it doesn't really bother me if they think that I'm an idiot anymore. Like, it's just, okay, bully to you. Go on and live your life. I will go on living mine. I don't know. We had a few other questions, but let me just see if I'm gonna pick one last question, and then we're gonna tie everything up for today. I think this is a good one. Is the field of archaeology saturated with too many people, or are more needed?
So I think this also is going to depend on where you are and what your goals in archaeology are. Kind of a common critique of archaeology, at least in the U.S., is we produce more PhDs than there are academic jobs by a significant margin. And even if you're a great archaeologist and a great researcher, you do have to have a bit of luck to get quite a bit of luck to get into these positions. And so one of the big things for me, I think we could always use more archaeologists, especially people with different backgrounds and everything like that, because they're bringing that into the field. And if we're trying to understand people, what better way to do it than understanding the different, with bringing in knowledge about from different backgrounds and things like that. So I think there's always room for more. In academia, it's tough, but at least in the U.S. in cultural resource management, depending on how the current political administration handles things, like the last couple of months, we've been extremely busy and we couldn't find enough archaeologists because we had all the federal agencies trying to spend up all the money they could because they were afraid they were getting taken away. So unfortunately, and I know people like do not think this, but archaeology is very political. At least in the U.S., a lot of the things we do rely on federal compliance. And so because of that, there's a political nature to it. So yeah, for me, I say in academia, we could probably use with a few less PhDs. I say that as someone who's about to graduate with a PhD and starting to, but in CRM, I think there's definitely a need for more archaeologists, and I think even in like PhDs, like just a collaboration work with people from different backgrounds is definitely needed.
John?
Well, I would simply say from a longer perspective than either of you has. I finished my BA in archaeology in 1980. I graduated the year that Ronald Reagan was elected. After that, there was, the economy was not in great shape, and there were just not very many jobs around. And so I've been dealing for the past almost 50 years with people saying, well, archaeology, can you make a living at that? Are you sure that's what you want to do? My mother-in-law once asked me, she said, are your children going to be able to wear shoes? I've been dealing with that for my entire career, which actually is now, I would say 50 years, because I wrote my first paper on an archaeological topic in 1975. But there have always been jobs for good archaeologists. There always will be jobs for people who are passionate and who are competent. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of dedication. But looking at the long term, the people I've known who wanted to do archaeology as a career, who wanted to be professionals in it, have, for the most part, been able to do that. Now, it requires some sacrifice. I teach at the University of Kansas. I grew up on the East Coast of the United States. I never in a million years imagined that I was going to be living in the heartland, in the Great Plains. But this is where the job was. And I came here and in a tenure track position, and I've been teaching Central and South American archaeology in Kansas, of all places, for almost 37 years now. But again, the people who stick with it, the people who really want to do it, will find jobs, whether it's in museums, whether it's in CRM, whether it's now in archaeological journalism and making YouTubes, kind of new media stuff. We need a lot more of that. Back in the day, there weren't cable channels with 120 channels, and there certainly wasn't the internet with thousands of potential channels. Archaeology is something that people have a genuine interest in, and that's not going to go away. And I can tell you from my whole kind of lifetime career perspective, it has only increased. And so there will always be a revenue source. There will always be an interest. Government sort of wax and wane in terms of what their support for it is or is not going to be. But if we speak to the kids, if we speak to the K through 12 students and get their interest in it, there will be interest. And with the interest comes the funding. It's not the other way around. It's not the funding comes first and then it creates the jobs. It's the interest that generates the funding. And so the better we're able to, and thank you, Rachel, for doing this show and other types of things, the better able archaeologists can communicate with the general public about what archaeology is about, what we experience, why it is validating in our lives and the lives of so many other people to imagine what the human experience has been for this 3.5 million years that we've been on planet Earth as a species Homo, or our recent relatives. We're not recent close relatives. I'm thinking Australopithecines. I like to think about Australopithecines as being our cousins too. But understanding that 3.5 plus million year experience is a very important part of the human psyche, and we just need to continue promoting that, and fulfilling that, and providing this information that people want, in spite of all of the cuts. What I'm seeing at my university now is that the state legislature says, well, we only want to train KU students for jobs that they can do in the state. And, there are archaeology jobs in the state, but I have students who are interested in South America or the UK or Greece or things like that. I'm going to continue trying to train students with a global perspective on archaeology. But it's not a STEM discipline. It's not something that's that's immediately getting that high, what's seen to be high return funding. Um, and anyone who thinks that they can become rich and famous doing archaeology needs to do something else. It's not going to make you rich and famous. But one of the things that I think is baffling to many of these trolls and others is that archaeologists in general, I think as a rule, are not motivated by money. It's not those. It's not the ability to make a big salary or to have a big income that makes us do what we do. We do what we do because it's fulfilling, because we love it. And so I would invite as many people as interested to do it. If you don't feel that, making a lot of money and putting it in the bank is your primary motivation during this lifetime that you have. If there are other priorities, follow your dreams, follow your bliss. You only get, and in the archaeological perspective, it's very, very short, but you only get about 80 or 90 years on this planet. Don't waste it. Do it. Devote your time on this earth to something that you really love. And I have never for 1 minute regretted my career in archaeology. And I'm now 66 years old. So if it's something that floats your boat, go for it.
Yeah.
There will always be jobs for those people who do it well and who are creative. And, more power to you in finding new ways to do it. There are lots of new ways to do it, including YouTubing, including archaeological journalism, including writing books for the general public, including outreach. All of those things are absolutely critical.
Yeah, I agree. And also something I've come across a few times from other people as well is this idea of like, oh, well, are we running out of archaeology? That is not a risk. There is more than enough archaeology to go around for everyone to be able to scratch that itch. And as well, even if you can't do it as something that as a career, if that's not possible for you, then volunteering opportunities or like local digs and stuff like that are also a way to get involved. As much as I don't want to like campaign for, unpaid labor, funding is getting cut. Museums sometimes want volunteers. You get to touch old stuff and do things and help them out. That's a way to get involved. Certainly, as you're saying, like it's in terms of, funding, that's always an impact on the jobs and the job market. It fluctuates. At times there's a need for more archaeologists and at times there's less. But as you said, if it's something that you really want to do as a job, then you will be able to find a way to do it. Thank you everyone for all the questions, and thank you to my two guests very much for coming on today. The cat is giving me the evil eye because it's well past her dinner time, so I'm gonna have to cut things short. I wish we could keep on going, but we'll have to just do this another time. The Real Archaeology event, I think, is going to be coming up in October. I do believe we are all planning on doing that again, so we'll have to see if we do another live stream. Don't forget to go follow JT on his YouTube channel. John, is there anywhere that you mentioned that your socials are a bit locked?
Academia.edu is where I post all of my stuff. People can find virtually everything I published on my page on academia.edu, which is a great resource. And then just Google on my name. You'll find me all over the place.
Okay, sounds great. So thank you so much for coming, both of you. Thanks to everybody for watching and for sticking with it. If you've been here for the entire 2 hours, it's been a joy answering your questions, and I look forward to answering some more next year when we do this all again.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, and thanks for all the questions, and thanks for putting this together. It was really enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. This was wonderful.
Oh, lovely. I'm glad everyone enjoyed it. All right, I'll just end the stream now. Bye, everyone. And there we go. All done. That went by really fast.
It did. I think it was really good. I think